We're going to talk about cities and make one for our tabletop RPGs. It shouldn't be Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder or Blades in the Dark or the Witcher RPG or any of those kind of systems specific. It is going to be a high fantasy world because that's what I like to do and it's what I DM. But it should be fairly system agnostic because these are just people and places and factions. And I'm going to try to show my thought process. I've seen a lot of these things done where there's like, hey, here's my city. Here's my explanation for my factions. Then people kind of comment, yeah, but how did you come up with that stuff? I was talking to a friend, they're like, yeah, but how? It's not like a strike of lightning hits my head and I'm like, aha, fully formed world with everything in there. I'm going to clip out bits that are super boring of me just hitting my head against the desk or maybe fast forward through them. I don't know. But I want to put out there one video for some dungeon master who's struggling and going, I can't just improvise and I don't know how to plan. I don't know where to draw inspiration from. I don't know how to think about this stuff. Where do I even start with this blank page of nothingness and get an engaging place for my players to play? I'm going to do an Elven city, but I do not want it to be Rivendell again. It's been done. So it needs to be something also mid-sized, someplace that's not the starting village that our players start off in or that roadside tavern. This has to be a place that they can come back to time and time again and start thinking of it as home, where they might eventually own some sort of a keep or a tavern or bard school or wizard tower. They're going to set down roots. We need factions, we need rulers, people for them to interact with that are going to be recurring NPCs. I am a planning dungeon master. I like plans. I have followed the maxim that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. If the players start throwing wrenches and do things that I don't expect, I can always fall back on, I know these people. Whatever the ruler is of my particular city, Folston Pritchard, in one of my kingdoms, I know who Folston is. I know who the Empress Yamashiro Constantina is. I know what she wants, and when the players start throwing wrenches at me, I can juggle them because I'm always going to view it through, well, who is Empress Constantina Yamashiro? She wants to be a true empress. She does not like being a puppet for all these other power people. And if the players approach her,
I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you.
She's not going to take it well. But if they approach it showing that they have the interest of the empire at heart, not the people, but the state at heart, she's probably going to go along with them and go, okay, you are people I can trust because you will put the good of the empire, she's not a very nice person, over the good of the individual, whether that's an individual citizen or an individual noble. Our town needs to be mid-sized because we don't want it to be a giant water deep that's largely useless to us. It's a cool place to go and visit, but you're really only going to interact with, half a dozen to a dozen NPCs anyway. And there's already so much there that the players can't really become the stars of the town. I want it to be Elven. When I think of elves, my elves are from the same stock as humans, just separated by eons because they shifted into the Fey realm for a while where time moves differently. So they evolved differently than the humans did. And then they came back. And so they have magical powers because they are steeped in the realm of fairy. But they are related. And if you were a super long-lived kind of ex-human race, and you have a bunch of other humans around because I need it to be like a kind of Mediterranean, a metropolitan, not super metropolitan, but like a trade hub. So my players can play anything from anywhere and feel comfortable in this city. So the elves are in control, but you've got all these short-lived races, humans, gnomes, halflings, orcs, whatever else is in there. You naturally look at these people kind of like children. Like, look, we've got all the knowledge and maybe all the power because if you live for a long time, for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, you naturally start coalescing some power around you for good or evil because you're just always there and you know everything from before. So you start, if a person lived for 2,000 years, they naturally start to be the one that's in control of everything, at least behind the shadows. So our elves are like that. They're someone that's in control of this city. They have these shorter-lived races that live with them, and they kind of see them as children. Maybe they see them as petulant children or well-meaning children. Maybe they view them as they need to discipline them or they need to kind of nurture them. And that can give us different characters as they think about their relationship to other races. That would form some of their ideology. If you're this species of shorter-lived race and you're constantly being told what to do, no, don't do that. We know what's right because we've been around for a long time. Then you'd start to begrudge them that. Much like young adults often begrudge their elders and go, no, you don't understand. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they have been through this in the past before and they have a good answer, but that's not really going to matter to a young person or a shorter-lived race. So species, that's really hard to get used to. Shorter-lived species, then they would start to ferment some kind of animosity. We're always going to be second-class citizens to this older race that may or may not mean well, but no one's going to like that. So that gives us some additional factions as we have the relationship between these people that are super long-lived and how they see the younger races, and the younger races being naturally kind of antagonistic towards these people, whether they are the ones that mean them well or mean them ill. Then we have, what is this city kind of? I kind of want it to be a city-state, because if it's an emperor or an empire or a full kingdom, then I have to kind of flesh out the kingdom. But if I do a city-state, I only have to flesh it out, kind of like something like Venice or Monte Carlo, or to a lesser degree, Hong Kong during the 90s, or some of those city-state areas. Venice is a really good example in kind of middle age, where we could go, okay, we can use Venice as a reference, and that is a port city with a lot of art, and that kind of gets us the traditional Elven tie-in of being super artsy. Super flowing lines. There's all the water flowing around, nature. Venice has a lot of stonework, but we can replace that. We can do whatever we want. All the water being around, nature, like a grove, that could be cool. But that means we've got a trade hub of elves on a city-state, and then we can kind of surround it with other kingdoms. We don't have to super flesh them out. We just have an idea of like what is their political kind of stances, because they're going to have pressure on our city-state. If our city-state is somewhere like Venice, someplace that is a very vibrant trade hub, those places remain powerful and independent despite pressures from other places to try to swallow them, because they're able to play both sides against the other. So we have to have a ruler in there that is fighting off these opposing larger empires or kingdoms or whatever fighting there. So we just need to figure out who these people are and how this relates to this neutral party in the middle. These other powers are probably going to feature very heavily into our storylines. Let's talk about who these people are. Because our central kind of conflict is long-lived elves and how they treat the humans, and other kingdoms should reflect that in some way, and that would form our stories here. So we have on the one side this group of people that are non-elven, and to kind of stress their nature, I'm thinking of them as kind of like a collection of other city-states that have formed a mutual defense pact, a confederacy or an alliance, saying, well, what we want is different, but we all agree on one thing, which is we don't want to be conquered by whoever this is over here, which, because this is all our non-elven people, this must be our elven people. And that make some sense over why they come to blows in this city and say, like, we're kind of all treating this as neutral ground, but we're all vying for ultimate control of it. That allows us some leeway to say we don't have to populate this with every city and every type of government they have, because we could have an authoritarian government in here. We could have a democratic government. We could have an oligarchy. We'd have all sorts of different governments over here, a majocracy, that have all independent, except for one issue, which is don't get conquered. They all answer to a singular democratic organization. Think about like the European Union. Independent countries all going, we'll obey some similar laws because we have a similar interest, which is, in this case, trade. But in our case, don't get conquered. On the other side, we have the people that are a threat to them. And because these are the non-elves, these are the elves. And we already know some things about them because we know something about our city. Traditionally, if we look at the view of elves through fantasy, elves are a long-lived species. Because they're long-lived, that's usually tied to a very low birth rate. So these people over here are, in a way, desperate not to enter any sort of a military conflict because they almost can't help but lose. They enter a conflict, and if they win, their fighting force, their population is severely depleted. And while they might inflict heavier losses on whoever it is, let's call this the Alliance. I think my hands are switched. We might call this the Alliance, the non-elves. Whichever. They can still reinforce their fighting forces within the next 40, 20 years, depending on who's the major force there, who's the fighting force. Probably humans, because they populate very quickly, or even more quickly if you say that part of that alliance is orcs and goblins. So elves, sure, I could win, but I ultimately lose because I will not be ready to fight again for another 100, 200, 300 years. They lost, but they're ready to fight again in 20 to 40 years. I can't suffer that. That does mean I have to have a military force and I have to have something that they're very afraid of. So I probably have a very highly effective commando force that fits with our elves. They're highly forested. So if these human forces come in, they're going to be fighting a guerrilla war against fighters that are really good in their natural territory. We've got these archers and we can field, let's say, 200 of them for every 2,000 troops that the Alliance can field. And in a place where we can use hit and run tactics, we are exceptionally effective. But if we ever have to leave our forest, we can't really field any kind of massive infantry or cavalry. So yeah, 200 elven archers are going to do a lot of damage against 2,000 human soldiers. But the human soldiers are going to get to the archers eventually, and they will wipe them out. Maybe we have alliances with giants or dragons are a classic one. And that's our big, heavy thing that we can say, you're afraid of. If you come to war with us, we will unleash X and say, we'll send the dragons in to wipe you out. So we have an alliance with a goodly dragon or an evil dragon. Maybe our elves are actually evil, and they've got a red dragon that kind of is given tribute in return. He's perfectly happy to wipe out some human towns every now and then. It also sets our elves up as even more on the kind of xenophobic side. And that makes sense for our town. Maybe that's why they don't like it. Maybe they don't want to conquer it so much as just purge it. We don't like that there are humans in there mixing around, even in a social way, with elves. What if there is intermarriage between the elves and the humans going on in that town? That might be offensive to this group of people because they don't like that. That can set up some things for our town as well. In many fantasies, there's the idea of the higher born elves. Tolkien has the elves that have seen Valinor, that are the higher elves than their forested kin.
Worthy of the skill of our woodland kin.
These elves over here are super high born and super xenophobic. And these people are not that bad. They're not good, but they're not that bad. That means that within our city, we have these two forces that are kind of conflicting with each other, and they're using it because you do still have to have some way to talk to the other side and have some sort of trade, because there is some value there. If you are these elves, how do you get iron? You don't have it. Your place is ostensibly just this giant forested wood where you still need iron for some things for a society. So where are you getting it? You got to get it from dwarves, and the dwarves don't want to talk directly to you. So you have this, through line that goes around and into the elves so that they can trade with people that they're at war with. That means that we have some informed thing about our cities. So if these are elves, they are possibly related to the other elven kingdom. And we can set up some things about our leader. I guess I'm thinking about her as a woman. Okay. She is, let's make her a regent. She's not born to rule. She doesn't inherit naturally, neither will children, if she has any, inherit rule. So she can be removed from office. She is instilled in the office by, let's say, 3 noble families. And I'm thinking of like Romeo and Juliet, the Montagues and the Capulets, and a third. Because that third acts as if I can shift it left and right, the politics of our cities move. That means they're always tugging her in one way or another, trying to get her to join their side, and she's trying to play them off each other so that she can remain in power, while she's also trying to play these people off of each other to keep her city safe. And while she's trying not to get it to erupt in some sort of a civil war because the humans are being mistreated by the elves. All the non-elves are being mistreated by the elves. That means that our internal conflict is now mirroring this bigger conflict, and we can say, this house, I don't know what my directions are on here, so sorry about that. This house right here is friendly-ish to humans. They might view humans like I view my dogs. They are a part of my family, but my job is to be a good caretaker and provider, and in some cases discipline them and say, no, you cannot eat whatever that is that you put in your mouth. That's bad for you. Spit that out. And the dog does not want to spit that out. The dog wants that, but it can't eat a grape or chocolate or things like that. I got to get that out of their mouth, and I will get bit doing it because the dog really wants that. Then there is the other house, and let's go to the far side and talk about the other one before talk about the middle house. Whoever this is, maybe they're related to that big noble family, more closely related, but there's something about them, like maybe they're the bastard line. You weren't really supposed to inherit. You weren't supposed to be a thing under our system. We can't really acknowledge you, but you are useful. We can send you off to the city, and you can be our line there while we, the proper born inheritors, get to rule over here in the proper elven area, and our family has a chip on their shoulder about that. We could also say maybe they are intermarried. So this high elven, and we're thinking about like the ones that went to Valinor in Lord of the Rings. I can't remember where it's Qualinest or something in Dragonlance. Qualinisti? Whatever. Some of them left, intermarried with our low elves, and now from these people's perspective, they're less than. And that puts a chip on their shoulder too and says, oh, well, they treat us like garbage, so we're going to treat everybody else like garbage. That's a common thing that our players will understand and go, oh, well, of course they're jerks. I like the idea that this third faction kind of doesn't care. They don't necessarily see all these non-elven people as their responsibility either to quell or subjugate or to act as sort of mentors to these people. You do your thing and we'll do our thing. Why do we have to be involved at all? I think we're going to do a video on neutrality very soon, specifically so I can talk about chaotic neutral. But for me, that's what neutrality is there's many types of neutrality, but that's the case I'm using here is I'll mind my business, you mind your business, and we don't have to be involved in one another. Why do I have to do anything to help you. Can't you do it yourself? That allows us to use these as a balancing force, as when it comes down to it and says, okay, now this is going to impact you. You have to do something, because if you don't, you will be impacted. These people could swing either way, and that allows our players to have some way to influence the city by doing things for or against this middle house. Or these other two houses, and make them more powerful or less powerful. We haven't talked about religion because it's important, but you could really fit anything into a city if you wanted to. You could fit a very monotheistic version of a city and say, of religion, and say, both groups worship it. Maybe that's where the one thing that the humans and the elves have in common that they don't have with, say, orcs or goblins from the outside, or giants or dragons, or the Empire or the Alliance. And that's where they have some disagreements. Or you could have a system where it is monotheistic and the elves and the humans, the non-elves, worship in a very different way. Or you have a polytheistic one where the elves have their patrons and their favored deities, and the humans have theirs. Or maybe the elves are atheist. Maybe they've outlawed religion and the non-elves practice religion. And so the non-elves would have to do that in an underground area. And that connects our religion with some of our illegal organizations and says, okay, they have to practice underground. I kind of like that. So one day we'll do make up a pantheon on here and how we would do that, but not this day. So for now, we're going to say that the elves, while they might be religious in this city, largely don't practice it. It is a private thing, if anything else. They don't build up these big mega churches or anything. They don't build cathedrals, but the humans do. So they might have smaller, acceptable religions. Let's say that they don't, because I like a tie-in that I'm starting to think of here. Let's say that they don't, and it's underground in the cities. That means that it is tied in with criminal organizations that they might not agree with. Let's say that the religion in this city is a force for good, for liberation, for hope for our people, because that's often the case when you have downtrodden people. Religion and faith can be a huge source of comfort and hope that things will get better. That if we can resist, or we can inspire, or we can just wait long enough, that things will change and get better. But because we're illegal and the elves know that that's what it is, they want that gone. So we must ally with people we don't want to get along with, our underground enterprise, which we'll talk about in just a moment, to have churches, to have faith, to have gatherings of people. Why do I like that? Because there's also a natural kind of other antagonistic force that we need to talk about, which is whoever keeps the rules in our city, our city watch, and our criminal organization. Our city watch is probably run by these noble houses up here, which are Elven, but they would be filled with all the non-elves. Maybe the captain of our guard is a human and they think that they're doing it because if I can just prove that I am civilized in the manner that the elves believe we should be civilized, then they will stop treating my people so badly. I believe that I'm doing this as an example of what we could be. You're wrong about us. We are not these unwashed, uncivilized, brutal masses that you think we are. We can be good if you just treat us that way. But that also puts them in conflict with the underground, our illegal criminal organization. You got to have an illegal criminal organization. Why? Because it's a fantasy realm and you probably have a rogue and they're going to want to deal with it in some way or form. So we have this criminal organization that's by necessity made up of non-humans, because much like in the 1920s, when the United States had a lot of immigrants in places like New York, that's how the mob got started. All these people that were immigrating were not protected by the traditional police forces. They really didn't care what happened to them and often were very abusive to them. So turning to the mob for protection from the police force, but also from other gangs. That's how protection rackets worked. I will pay you to protect my place because the police won't do it from gang violence from these other gangs. And they did until they got rid of the gangs, in which case now I'm still doing the protection racket because I still want that money. And I'm going to go, well, you still got to pay me the money because even though those gangs are gone, if you don't pay me the money, I will burn down your pizzeria. So we have this gang that's starting under here, our criminal organization that's made up of the same people that the city watches, and they would have some cross-pollination. Think of everything you've seen about like on shows where there's a police organization and they find out that some of their officers are on the take and they are getting paid by the mob to look the other way. Even more so because they know this Thieves Guild is helping religion to flourish in the underground and go, well, we believe and we're humans and we go to these religious services and they're protected by the let's call them like I like the idea from like the rabbits from Gangs of New York. Let's call them the rats. I like names where you can kind of suggest for our Thieves Guild where you can kind of talk about them without talking about them. That way, as dungeon masters, we can drop hints and maybe the players slowly dawn on the idea that when we mention the rats are thick in the West Harbor. They don't necessarily immediately realize, oh, wait, that's not just rats. That's rats with a capital R. This is an organization. So we can put rats as our Thieves Guild are protecting religious organizations, partially for their own good, because they're going, well, I know that gets me in with people. It also means that we can have these rats making deals with the Elven noble families. Again, going back to like the 1920s gangs in New York kind of idea, it was not uncommon for local politicians in those boroughs to make deals with gangs to fix elections. So we can use that as a way to tie different things together in ways that the players will understand when it happens, but won't necessarily know that that's what they're stepping into. You notice I don't have a map of this city. I've drawn maps. I like to draw maps of the cities. And I'll always do it because it's fun for me. But honestly, the players don't use them. They like them. They look at them and they go, this is cool. What is this over here? And they'll find maybe points of interest that they're interested in hearing about. So it's useful in that regard. But they're not ever going to say, well, I want to go down this street to this street to this street. I just want to say, I go to the blacksmith. And you might say, well, you don't know where one is. And then they're going to say, well, can I ask like the city guard? Yeah, of course they can. And city guard tells them where it is. It's on West 41st Street and Cook Street. Okay. Well, I go there. You're not going to ask them to do this and draw their way on the map. That's boring. So you just have them travel there. And maybe you have random encounters on the map that you're designed and say, well, when they go here, they're going to see this to show the treatment of noble elves of commoner humans. Okay, just do that. Don't ask them to route through it and say, well, you happen to route around it. Drats. Guess you don't get to see that scene now. You want that to happen. Just have it happen. It's not railroading. It's setting up the larger plot points and go, well, you can choose to react or not. That's the choice. But I do need you to know what's going on in the city so you can start figuring out where you're going to fit in and how your character feels about what's going on. So I think in our next episode, we'll start thinking about how we can make some of the plot hooks in this. Or maybe next episode will be like take a break and go do alignment, because then I can get some feedback on this episode and find out if kind of rambly stream of consciousness was even a good idea or not. So if you've gotten this far and you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a sub and a comment down there of what you thought about it. If this was at all useful or if it's something I should never, ever do again. Till next time, Dungeon Masters, remember, you're a player too. Try to have some fun.